Her stepmother grabbed her by the hair and dragged her down the stairs like she was nothing, like she weighed nothing, like she meant nothing. "Stop crying," Linda snapped, throwing her toward the man standing in the doorway. "She's yours. We're done." Ava hit the floor on her knees. She looked up and saw a stranger in a black suit staring down at her with eyes that gave away nothing. No pity, no cruelty, just calculation. She had been sold. $40,000. That was the price her stepmother put on her life. And the monster they handed her to, he simply reached down and said, "Get up." If you are watching this right now, please subscribe to our channel and follow Ava's story all the way to the end. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let us go back to that night, because what happened next changed everything. The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight by the time the black car pulled up to the house on Crestline Avenue. Ava heard it first. She always heard everything in that house because she had trained herself to. When you live with people who hurt you for sport, your ears become your only early warning system. She heard the engine cut off. She heard one door open, then close. She heard footsteps on wet concrete, steady and unhurried, the kind of footsteps that belong to someone who has never been afraid of arriving anywhere. She was in the kitchen when her stepmother, Linda Whitmore, called her name. "Ava, come to the living room now." Not a request. It was never a request with Linda. It was always a command dressed up in just enough softness to make you feel crazy for resenting it. Ava wiped her hands on a dish towel, set it on the counter, and walked out. Linda was standing near the fireplace in her good dress, the burgundy one she only wore when she wanted to impress someone. Ava noticed that immediately. She also noticed the man sitting in the armchair across from the couch. He was not what she expected. She had imagined, if she had imagined anything at all, that a man who drove through a rainstorm to visit Linda at 10 o'clock at night would look cheap somehow. Rushed, nervous. This man looked like he had never been nervous in his life. He was perhaps 40, with dark hair that was just beginning to gray at the temples, and dark eyes that moved across the room with the same slow assessing quality as someone reading a contract before they signed it. He was wearing a suit that cost more than anything Linda had ever owned. His hands were resting on his knees. He had not touched the glass of wine Linda had placed on the side table next to him. He looked at Ava the moment she walked in. She looked back at him and then at Linda, and she said, "What is this?" Linda smiled. That particular smile, the one that never reached her eyes. "Sit down, Ava." "I'd rather stand." "What's going on?" "I said sit down." Ava did not sit down. The man watched this exchange without expression. Then he spoke for the first time, and his voice was low and very even, like a man reciting facts rather than participating in a scene. "You're Ava." It was not a question. She answered it anyway. "Yes." "My name is Dominic Russo." She did not know the name then. She would learn later what it meant. She would learn later that half the city knew that name and the other half pretended not to. She would learn later that men who owed Dominic Russo money did not sleep well, and men who betrayed him did not sleep at all. But in that moment, in that living room, with the rain hitting the windows and Linda standing by the fireplace with that terrible smile, the name meant nothing to her. "Is someone going to tell me what's happening?" Ava asked. Linda set her own wine glass down. "Your father left debts, Ava. You know that." "My father left debts that you created." She kept her voice flat. She had learned not to cry in front of Linda years ago. Tears only made Linda happy. "I've been working 2 jobs to pay them off." "You haven't been working fast enough." "Then get a job yourself." Linda's expression flickered. There it was, that cold flash beneath the surface, the part of her stepmother that was all sharp edges and contempt. But she controlled it quickly because the man in the armchair was watching, and Linda always performed better when there was an audience. "There's been an arrangement made," Linda said. "Mr. Russo extended significant credit to this household over the past 2 years. That credit has come due." Ava went very still. "What kind of credit?" "The financial kind." "How much?" $40,000. The number landed in the room like something dropped from a height. $40,000. Ava's mind worked fast, the way it always had, running numbers, running possibilities. Even if she worked both jobs for 2 more years, without spending a single dollar on food or rent, she could not come close to $40,000. And she knew, standing there in her father's old cardigan, with her hands starting to go cold, that this was not actually about the money. Why is he here? Ava said. She was looking at Linda, not at Dominic Russo. Why is this man in our house? Because I made an agreement with him. What kind of agreement? Linda glanced at Dominic, and something passed between them, something that Ava did not fully understand until the next words came out of her stepmother's mouth. You'll go with him, in lieu of the debt. The silence that followed was so complete that Ava could hear the rain on the glass and her own heartbeat and absolutely nothing else. Then she said very quietly, say that again. It's a fair arrangement. You're 23. You have no real prospects here. You've been a burden on this household since your father. Say that again. Louder this time. You're sending me with him. It's already decided. Ava turned and looked at Dominic Russo for the first time without flinching. She looked at him the way you look at something that is about to destroy you completely and directly because you've already decided there's no point in looking away. You bought me. He held her gaze. He did not look away either. That is what was offered. And you accepted. I did. You're a monster. Something moved across his face. It was there and gone so fast she almost missed it. Not offense, not guilt, something else, something she couldn't name yet. He said nothing. I'm not going, Ava said. She turned back to Linda. I'm not going anywhere with anyone. You cannot do this. This is not legal. This is not. Your name is on the loan paperwork, Ava. She froze. What? Your father signed loans in both your names before he died. Did he not tell you? Linda tilted her head. Oh, he didn't, did he? That's very unfortunate. Ava's hands had gone from cold to numb. She thought of her father. She thought of the last year of his life when he was sick and frightened and doing things that didn't make sense, borrowing money, signing things, trying to secure some kind of future for her before he went. She had thought it was life insurance. She had thought it was savings. She had not asked the right questions because she had been too busy being terrified of losing him. He had tried to help her, and someone she suspected, Linda, had turned those attempts into chains. You can fight it if you want, Linda said almost gently. I'm sure there are lawyers who would love to hear your story. Of course, while you're fighting it, the interest will keep accumulating. And Mr. Russo's patience has, as I said, run out. Ava stood very still for a long moment. She was doing the thing she always did when she was most afraid, pulling everything inward, going quiet, going small, finding the center of herself that nobody had managed to reach, yet the part that was still hers. She found it. She held on to it. Then she looked at Dominic Russo again. If I go with you, what happens to me? He looked at her steadily. You live in my house, under my protection. You follow my rules. And if I don't follow your rules, then we'll have a problem. Do you hurt people? The room went very quiet. Linda made a small, uncomfortable sound. Dominic Russo looked at Ava as if she was the first person who had asked him that question directly in a very long time. Yes, he said, when they give me reason to. Have I given you reason to? Not yet. She absorbed that. She turned, walked back to the hallway, went upstairs and packed a single bag. It took her 11 minutes. She did not pack anything that Linda had given her. She packed her father's watch, her medical textbooks from the 2 semesters of nursing school she'd had to drop when he got sick of photograph, and 3 changes of clothes. She stood in the doorway of her bedroom for exactly 1 breath, looked at the water stain on the ceiling she had looked at every night for 3 years, and then she walked out. Her stepsister Brielle was standing in the hall. Brielle was 25 and had their mother's eyes and their mother's particular gift for cruelty disguised as carelessness. She looked at Ava's bag and smiled. It was almost identical to Linda's smile. The inheritance of meanness passed cleanly between them. Have fun, Brielle said. Ava looked at her. I hope the money lasts. Something flickered in Brielle's expression. Not guilt. She didn't have the equipment for guilt, but something close to recognition, the sense that a line had been crossed and could not be uncrossed. Ava walked past her and down the stairs and out the front door without looking back. Dominic Russo was already waiting beside the car. He opened the door himself. She noticed that. Not the driver. Him. She got in. The drive took 40 minutes. She did not ask where they were going. She sat on her side of the car and looked out at the rain-blurred city lights and kept her hands folded in her lap and thought very carefully about what she knew, what she didn't know, and what she needed to find out. She was not going to cry. She was not going to beg. She had done too much of both already in that house for people who used her tears like currency and spent them on nothing. Dominic sat on his side and said nothing. He looked out his own window or he looked at his phone, and he did not try to reassure her or explain himself or fill the silence with words designed to make her feel better about what had just happened. She found that strangely more bearable than anything else he could have done. The estate sat on a cliff above the Pacific. She felt it before she saw it, the particular quality of the air salt and cold and wide open the sense of space after a life spent in rooms that were always too small and too controlled by someone else's moods. The car passed through a gate up a long drive and stopped at a front entrance where two men in dark jackets stood at the door and stepped back without a word when Dominic approached. Inside, a woman named Petra, severe-faced but not unkind, showed Ava to a room on the third floor. It was larger than any room she had ever had in her life. The bed was real with actual weight to the mattress and pillows that were clean and cool to the touch. The window looked out over nothing but the black ocean and the rain. Petra said, "Breakfast is at 7. Mr. Russo expects punctuality. There is a lock on your door. You may use it." She paused at the threshold. "You are not a prisoner here, but you are also not free to leave. I would suggest spending your first few days learning the difference between those two things." Then she left. Ava sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed. She thought about everything that had just happened in the precise sequential way she thought about everything when she was scared. What was the immediate danger? What was the next step? What resources did she have? What did she know that could help her? She was alive. She was not hurt. She was in a room with a lock. She had her father's watch and her textbooks and herself. It was not nothing. She did not sleep easily, but she slept. And when she woke up and the morning came through the window, gray and clean and cold off the ocean, there was no one screaming at her to get up. No cup thrown at the wall to wake her. No footsteps outside her door at 3 a.m. because Linda was drunk and in the mood to be vicious. Just silence. Real silence. The kind she had almost forgotten existed. She got up, washed her face, and went downstairs at 6:58. Dominic was already at the table. He was reading from a tablet coffee beside him, jacket off for the first time since she'd seen him. He looked in the pale morning light of the kitchen like a man with a very complicated life that he managed to keep very controlled. He looked up when she came in. "Sit," he said. She sat, not because he told her to, but because she had decided that the most useful thing she could do right now was observe, and she could observe better from a chair than from a doorway. Petra brought coffee, brought food, real food, eggs and toast and fruit, the kind of breakfast that takes time and care, not the kind that gets thrown at you when someone remembers to put something out. Ava ate everything on her plate. She did not pretend she wasn't hungry. Pride was a luxury she had been too poor for too long to afford. Dominic watched her eat. She watched him watch her. It was not comfortable exactly, but it was honest, and she had decided that honesty, even the uncomfortable kind, was something she could work with. "Do you have questions?" he said when she'd finished. "Hundreds." "Ask 3, she considered. "What do you expect from me?" "Your presence. Your compliance with the rules of this house. Your discretion about what you see here." "What are the rules?" "You don't leave the property without an escort. You don't speak to anyone who works for me about what happens inside this house. You don't contact your stepfamily." "That last one isn't a hardship." Something moved across his face again. That same quick thing she'd seen the night before, gone before she could read it. "And the third question." She set her fork down. She looked at him. "When does the debt end?" He was quiet for a moment. "When I decide it has." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now." "Then I need you to understand something." She kept her voice level, kept her hands still, kept all of it controlled the way she'd had to keep everything controlled for 3 years. "I'm not going to spend every day here afraid. I don't function well afraid. If you want something useful from me, which I assume you do because you didn't pay $40,000 for company, then I need to know what the parameters are. I need to know where the lines are so I can work within them. Can you give me that?" He looked at her for a long moment. Long enough that she thought he was going to dismiss her entirely, that she had miscalculated, that she had pushed too fast. Then he said, "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Art. Someone easier to manage." "I'm sorry to disappoint." You didn't. He picked up his coffee. He returned to his tablet. The conversation was over. But something had shifted, something very small and very important, a quarter of an inch in either direction, and Ava felt it. She felt it the way you feel the moment a door that has been locked for a very long time moves slightly in its frame, not open yet, but no longer entirely closed. She went back upstairs. She unpacked her textbooks. She found a desk by the window and she sat at it and she looked out at the ocean, which was gray and enormous and indifferent, and she thought, I am still here. I am still thinking. I still have everything in my head that anyone has ever put there, everything I've learned and read and remembered. They sold me for $40,000. She intended to be worth considerably more than that before she was done. 2 days passed, then 3. She learned the rhythms of the house the way she had always learned the rhythms of places she wasn't sure she was safe in, carefully, quietly from the edges. She learned that Dominic left early and returned late, and that the men who came and went through the front door were careful around him in the specific way that people are careful around something with real weight behind it. Not fear exactly, but deep practiced respect. She learned that Petra had been with Dominic for 11 years and was loyal with a ferocity that needed no display. She learned that there were cameras at every entrance and rotating security, and that the estate, beautiful as it was also a fortress. And she learned that nobody, not Petra, not the men at the door, not the driver who brought groceries twice a week, looked at her with cruelty. They looked at her with curiosity, some with wariness, but not cruelty. It was the most unfamiliar thing about the place. On the 4th day, she was in the library, which was real floor-to-ceiling shelves and a fireplace and chairs that had been used enough to be comfortable when Dominic walked in and stopped when he saw her. I didn't think you'd find this room, he said. It's the best room in the house. It's my room. The door was open. He looked at the textbook in her lap. He came close enough to read the spine. She felt him clock. It felt the small shift in his attention that she was beginning to recognize as his version of surprise. Pharmacology. I was in nursing school for 2 semesters before my father got sick. Why didn't you go back? Someone had to work. Linda wasn't going to. He sat down across from her without asking if he could. She did not point out the irony. He picked up the book that was lying on the side table, one of his. It turned out a history of organized crime in Chicago, and for 40 minutes they sat in the same room reading without speaking. And it was, Ava would think later, one of the strangest and most real things that had happened to her in 3 years. When he got up to leave, he paused in the doorway. There's a full medical library in the room 2 doors down, if you want it. She looked up. Why do you have a medical library? Because knowing things has kept me alive more than once. She thought about that after he left. She thought about a man who surrounded himself with books about medicine and history and kept himself alive with knowledge rather than just violence. She thought about how that was different from what she had assumed. She thought about how assumptions were a kind of debt too, and how you had to keep revising them when the evidence stopped matching. She found the medical library that evening. She spent 3 hours in it. She came out knowing something she hadn't known before she went in, not just about medicine, but about the man whose house she was in. And on the 6th night, she started sleeping without waking up afraid. It was such a small thing. It should not have meant as much as it did. But 3 years of waking at every sound, 3 years of cataloging the position of footsteps in the hallway, 3 years of keeping herself tensed and ready because the next moment could bring something that required surviving, and now 6 nights of nothing, of silence, of a lock on her door that she had chosen to use. She lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling of her room and felt for the first time in years the edges of something she had almost forgotten. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't anything as fragile as happiness. It was something tougher, something that had been pressed down under everything that had happened to her and was now very slowly finding room to move. She was still angry. She intended to stay angry. Anger was useful, but underneath the anger, something else was breathing again. She pressed her hand flat against her chest and felt it. She was still here. After everything, she was still here, and she was paying attention. Because somewhere in this house, behind those careful dark eyes and all those rules and all that controlled silence, there was something she didn't understand yet. Something she needed to understand if she was going to survive this. If she was going to do more than survive, she was going to figure it out, whatever it took. The first week passed the way water passes over stone. Slowly, quietly. wearing something down without announcing it. Ava had made herself a system. She woke before 7. She ate what Petra put in front of her. She read in the medical library for 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon. She mapped the house in her mind the way her father had once taught her to map a room. Find the exits first, then figure out what's worth staying for. She watched Dominic's men come and go. She watched the rhythms of the gates, the timing of the security rotations, the way conversations stopped when she walked into a room and resumed the moment she left it. She was being watched. She knew that. She watched back. What she did not expect was the moment everything changed and how small it started. It was a Tuesday. She knew because Petra always made a particular kind of soup on Tuesdays, something with white beans and rosemary that filled the whole ground floor with warmth that had nothing to do with the heating system. Ava had come downstairs earlier than usual, and she heard voices in the room off the main hallway, the one with the heavy door that was almost always closed. She did not stop to listen. She was not careless. But she heard 3 words clearly as she passed, the transfer cleared. And then Dominic's voice flat and controlled, which account? And then another voice, one she didn't recognize yet. The Cayman wrote, same signature as before. She kept walking. She went to the kitchen. She sat down. And she turned those 3 pieces of information over in her mind like objects she had found on the ground, examining them from every angle, fitting them against everything else she had already observed, and she filed them away in the place she kept things that mattered. She was still doing that when Dominic walked into the kitchen 20 minutes later and stopped when he saw her sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and a closed expression. "You're up early," he said. "I couldn't sleep." He poured himself coffee and stood at the counter rather than sitting. She noticed he almost never sat in rooms with people behind him. She had cataloged that already. He was a man who kept walls at his back. "How long," he said without turning around, "were you in the hallway?" She did not pretend to misunderstand. "Long enough to hear 3 sentences, not long enough to understand them." "Do you make a habit of that?" "I make a habit of being aware of my surroundings. In the house where I grew up, not being aware got you hurt." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I wasn't listening for anything. I was just walking." He turned then. He looked at her with those dark, assessing eyes. She held the look without flinching. "What did you hear?" he said. "A Cayman account. A transfer. A signature that apparently matched something it shouldn't have." The room went very quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of the library. This was a different kind of silence, the kind that precedes something that holds pressure, the way a thundercloud holds rain. "You understood that," he said. "My father ran a small business for 15 years before he got sick. I did his books from the time I was 16. I know what irregular transfer patterns look like." She paused. "I'm not asking questions. I'm just telling you what I actually heard because you asked." He set his coffee cup down. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat in it, and this she was beginning to understand was significant. He did not sit across from people unless he had decided they were worth the direct angle. "What kind of business?" he said. "Import, wholesale auto parts, small operation, but honest." She said that last word deliberately. She watched him take it. "And you did his books, and reconciled his accounts, and caught 2 separate vendor overcharges in 3 years, and once figured out that his bookkeeper was skimming $300 a month by running duplicate invoices through a secondary vendor code." She looked at him steadily. "I was 19 the second time. I didn't go to college for accounting. I just pay attention." Something happened in Dominic Russo's face that she had not seen there before. Not warmth exactly. Something more guarded than warmth. Recognition. "Eat your breakfast," he said. He stood up. He picked up his coffee, and at the doorway he paused with his back still to her and said, "The man whose voice you heard this morning, his name is Caruso, Marco Caruso. He is my second in command, and he has been with me for 9 years." Another pause. "I'm telling you that so you know who to be careful around." He left. Ava sat very still for a moment. Then she reached for the toast Petra had left on a plate in the center of the table and ate it methodically, thinking hard. He had just told her something he didn't have to tell her. He had just handed her the name of the man she should be careful around. That was not what monsters did. She didn't know yet what it was, but it was not that. 3 days later, she found out why Caruso's name mattered. She was in the medical library when she heard raised voices down the corridor, muffled through two closed doors but still audible if you were paying attention, which Ava always was. She recognized Dominic's voice, the second voice she had to place, and then she had it. Caruso, lower than Dominic's, faster, with an edge of something that might have been defensiveness or might have been performance. She heard her own name. She went very still. She could not make out the full sentence, but she heard the girl, and she heard liability, and she heard, how long are you planning to keep her? And then she heard Dominic's voice come down like a door shutting. That is not your concern. Everything in this house is my concern. That's what you pay me for. I pay you to manage operations, not to question what goes on under my roof. She's been here 2 weeks, Dom. The men are asking. The men can mind their work. A pause, then Caruso again, quieter. She's going to cause problems. She already solves them. Dominic's voice was flat and final. We're done with this conversation. Ava heard footsteps. She picked up her book, opened it to a random page, and was reading with total apparent calm when the library door opened and Dominic looked in. He saw her. He saw the book. His eyes moved to her face, and she could see him reading her the way he read everything, carefully looking for what was beneath the surface. How much did you hear? He said. Again, no pretense. Enough to know that Caruso doesn't like me being here. He doesn't need to like it. Is he wrong that I'm a liability? Dominic leaned against the door frame. Outside the windows, the afternoon light was going gray and flat, that particular West Coast winter gray that felt like the sky pressing down. You know things about this house, he said. Yes, that creates exposure. That's what he means. And what do you mean when you tell him I solve problems? He looked at her for a long time. You caught something in that hallway that 3 of my people with actual training missed. The account irregularity. I had someone look into it after our conversation. The pattern you described, duplicated vendor codes hiding secondary transfers. That's exactly what we found. He paused. On a scale none of us expected. The air in the room changed. Ava set the book down slowly. How large a scale? Large enough that someone inside my organization has been diverting significant funds for at least 8 months without triggering any of my standard audits, because they designed the diversion to look like standard operating variance. Yes. Which means they understand your audit structure. Yes. Which means it's not someone new. She looked at him directly. It's someone you trust. The silence that followed was the heaviest one yet. She could feel the weight of it, the particular gravity of a man who had built an empire on knowing who to trust, and was now sitting with the knowledge that the knowing had failed him somewhere. I need someone to go through 18 months of transaction records, he said. Someone who can't be the source of the leak. Someone nobody inside the organization would think to watch. Ava understood what he was saying. She understood it completely. She also understood that she was being offered something, not freedom, not the end of the debt, but something, a function, a purpose, a reason to be here that she had defined rather than had handed to her. Give me the records, she said. He did. He gave her his laptop with encrypted files and a desk in a room nobody else used and told her she had a week. She finished in 4 days. She found 6 separate diversion channels, 3 active and 3 dormant, with a combined total that made her hands go steady in that particular way they went when she was most focused, the opposite of shaking, a kind of stillness that meant her whole mind had locked onto something. She knocked on the door of his office on the 4th evening. He opened it himself. He looked at her face. You found something. 6 somethings. She handed him the printed summary. 3 channels are still running. The dormant ones were likely tests to see if the audit system would catch them. It didn't. The active channels are routed through 4 different vendor accounts, all of which appear legitimate on the surface. But 2 of them share an incorporation address in Nevada, a shell company. The shell has 1 director listed. He was reading as she spoke. She watched his face. She watched the moment he found the name. He went very still. You recognize the name, she said. Yes. Is it someone inside your organization? He looked up from the paper. His eyes were dark and completely controlled, and underneath the control was something she recognized because she had felt it herself, the particular cold clarity of someone who has been betrayed by someone they chose to trust. Go back to your room, he said. Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you it's clear. Dominic. Ava. He said her name and she stopped. He hadn't used it before, not like that, with that particular weight behind it. Go, now. She went. She locked the door. She sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the house change around her footsteps on the stairs. She didn't recognize voices below a door slamming once, and then nothing for a very long time. At 2 in the morning, there was a knock at her door. She was still awake, still dressed, sitting in the chair by the window. "It's Petra," the voice said. She opened the door. Petra looked for the first time since Ava had arrived like someone who had been through something. Her usual severe composure was intact, but it was sitting differently on her like a coat pulled on too quickly. "He wants you to know you're safe," Petra said, "and that the matter has been addressed." "What does addressed mean?" Petra looked at her for a moment. "It means the man responsible is no longer a problem." "Was it Caruso?" Petra said nothing, which was its own answer. Ava leaned against the doorframe. She thought about the voice in the hallway 3 days ago calling her a liability. She thought about the dormant test accounts in the Nevada Shell Company and the 8 months of careful patient theft from a man who had given that person 9 years of trust. She thought about what it meant that she had found it and every person on Dominic's actual payroll had not. "Is Dominic all right?" she asked. Petra's expression shifted very slightly. "Just enough. He will be. It was a difficult night. He trusted Caruso for 9 years. That kind of thing doesn't stop hurting just because you handled it." Petra looked at her with something new in her eyes. Not quite warmth, something more careful than warmth. Assessment. The same quality Dominic had, but softer at the edges. "No," she said, "it doesn't." She left. Ava closed the door. She stood in the middle of her room and thought about trust, how rare it was, how expensive, how the price of getting it wrong could be enormous, and how the price of refusing to give it at all might be even higher, just slower, just lonelier. She did not sleep for a long time. In the morning, Dominic was at the breakfast table. He looked like a man who had also not slept, but who was very practiced at functioning without it. He had coffee, he had papers in front of him. He looked up when she sat down. "Thank you," he said. That was all. "You're welcome," she said. That was all. Petra brought food. They ate. Outside the windows, the ocean was doing what the ocean always did, enormous and indifferent, and completely unconcerned with the smallness of human disasters. Then Dominic said, without looking up from his papers, "You asked me on the first morning when the debt ends." She went very still. "I remember. I don't have a clean answer yet. But I want you to know that what you did this week is not nothing. It's not something I'm going to ignore. I wasn't doing it to reduce the debt." "I know." He looked up then. "That's why I'm not ignoring it." She looked back at him. She thought about the girl who had been dragged down a hallway 12 days ago and handed over like furniture. She thought about how that girl had sat in a car for 40 minutes and decided to survive. She thought about everything she had done since then, quietly, carefully, with nothing but her own mind and the habits her father had given her. She thought about how none of it had been for Dominic Russo. All of it had been for herself. "I need something," she said. "Ask. I need you to tell me if I'm ever in actual danger here. Not implied danger, not theoretical exposure. If there is a real specific threat to my safety, I need you to tell me directly. Not through Petra, not after the fact. I need to know." He studied her. "Why?" "Because I can't protect myself from things I don't know are coming. And I would rather know than not know, even if what I know is bad." Something settled in his expression, something that might have been in a different kind of man relief. "All right," he said, "that's a fair rule. Thank you. Are you going to make more rules?" "Almost certainly." And for the first time in the gray morning light, with coffee going cold between them and the whole complicated weight of the last 12 days sitting in the room, Dominic Russo almost smiled. It was not a large thing. It was barely visible, but it was there. Ava looked at it and filed it away with everything else she was learning about this man. She had been sold to a monster. She had arrived expecting cruelty and found something far more complicated, a man who lived inside a world of violence and chose with deliberate precision when to use it and when to put it down. A man who had trusted the wrong person for 9 years and had the particular loneliness of someone who couldn't afford to trust carelessly. A man who had looked at a woman everyone else had thrown away and said without sentiment, without performance, "You solved a problem. I'm not going to ignore that. It was not a love story, not yet. It was not even close to one. It was something rawer than that and more durable. It was two people in a house on a cliff above the ocean, both of them armed with the particular toughness of people who have survived things that should have broken them, learning carefully and without any guarantee of safety that the other one might be the first person in a long time who was actually worth paying attention to. And in the room 2 floors up, where she had been sleeping without nightmares for almost 2 weeks now, on a desk by a window with an ocean view, she still hadn't gotten used to. There was a laptop with 18 months of transaction records and a printed summary that had 4 nights ago changed the internal power structure of one of the most dangerous organizations on the West Coast. She had done that with her mind, with the skills her father had given her, and the habits she had built alone in the years since he died in the house where nobody saw her as anything worth keeping. She picked up her coffee. She looked out the window at the gray water, and she thought for the first time without any accompanying fear, I wonder what else I can do here. 3 weeks after Caruso disappeared from the estate life inside Dominic's world, settled into something Ava had not expected. Routine. Not the grinding, punishing routine of Crestline Avenue where every morning began with someone's mood determining whether she ate or didn't, spoke or didn't, existed without consequence or didn't. This was a different kind of routine. Purposeful. Almost in the strange way that only made sense if you had lived without purpose for long enough. Peaceful. She was given access to more financial records. Not everything. Dominic was careful, always careful. He gave information the way of the careful man dispenses medicine in measured doses, watching for reaction before giving more. But enough for her to see the architecture of what he had built, the layers of legitimate business woven through the parts that weren't the way money moved through his empire, like water through a complex irrigation system, always going somewhere specific, always leaving something behind. She understood it faster than he expected. She could tell by the way his eyes moved when she presented her analyses, that small recalibration, the quiet adjustment of a man updating his internal estimate of something. She did not find that satisfying exactly. She found it useful. Dominic's men had stopped looking at her with quite so much wariness. Some of them had graduated to something closer to cautious respect, the kind you extend to someone you don't fully understand, but have decided is probably not the threat you initially calculated. She learned their names. She did not pretend she hadn't. She did not perform ignorance to make anyone comfortable. She was done performing for people's comfort. There was a man named Felix who managed the estate's household operations and had a dry, resigned sense of humor about everything. There was a man named Torres who handled physical security and was built like a question nobody wanted to answer, but who always held the door and said good morning with complete sincerity. There was a younger man named Danny who was 26 and clearly still in the process of deciding what kind of person he was going to be, and who sometimes looked at Ava with an expression she recognized because she had worn it herself once. The look of someone trying to figure out if the life they had landed in was the life they actually wanted. She did not befriend any of them. She was not foolish enough for that, but she understood them, and understanding was its own form of power. It was Felix who told her on a Thursday morning in the 4th week that there was a dinner that weekend, a formal one. Dominic's senior people and 2 visiting associates from out of state. Felix said it with the careful neutrality of someone delivering information they were not sure how the recipient would take. Am I expected to attend? Ava asked. Mr. Russo said you would sit at the table. She thought about that for a moment. As what? Felix looked at her with his dry, resigned expression. I believe he said, and I'm quoting directly as herself. She thought about that for longer. The dinner was Saturday. She dressed in the simplest things she owned that could be called formal, a dark dress that had been her mother's. One of the 3 things she'd taken from Crestline Avenue that actually mattered. It fit imperfectly, a little loose at the shoulders, a little long, but it was real and it was hers, and she wore it the way she wore everything now without apology. She walked into the dining room and felt a shift the moment she crossed the threshold. There were 8 men at the table, Dominic at the head, the visiting associates, 2 men from a Seattle operation, one of whom was already looking at her with the particular dismissive attention of someone who has decided before the evening begins that a woman at this table is decoration. 3 of Dominic's remaining senior people, none of whom had Caruso's seniority, but all of whom had opinions about the girl whose name now appeared on financial analyses that went directly to the boss. And at Dominic's right hand, a man she hadn't seen before. Older, silver-haired, eyes that had seen a great deal and given away very little of it. Dominic stood when she came in. She noticed that. Nobody else did. He gestured to the seat on his left, directly across from the silver-haired man. "Gentlemen," Dominic said, not loudly, "this is Ava." No last name, no explanation, no apology, just her name delivered with the same weight he gave things that mattered. She sat, she unfolded her napkin. She looked at the silver-haired man across from her and said, "I don't know your name." He looked mildly surprised at being addressed so directly. "Vincent Mara." "Are you from Seattle as well?" "Chicago originally. I've been in Los Angeles for 6 years." "What brings you to dinner?" He smiled. It was a real smile, slightly surprised, slightly amused. "Business." "Of course." She turned her attention to the table at large, with the ease of someone who had decided before she sat down exactly how this evening was going to go. It went well for approximately 40 minutes. The food came. Conversation moved through the safe territories, first the way conversations do when men who do not entirely trust each other are gathered at the same table in direct coded feeling for edges. Ava listened. She ate. She asked a quiet question here and there, nothing aggressive, nothing that required anyone to adjust their guard. She was mapping the room. She was always mapping the room. It was the man from Seattle who started it. His name was Garrett, and he had the confidence of someone who had never been seriously challenged on his own ground and had therefore never developed the skill of reading a room accurately. He had been looking at Ava all evening with that dismissive attention she had clocked when she first walked in, and after 40 minutes and most of a bottle of very good wine, his control over his expression had loosened enough that the dismissiveness showed clearly. "I have to ask," Garrett said, directing it at Dominic with the particular performance of a man who thinks he's being charming. "How does this work exactly? You bring her to business dinners now." The table shifted, very slightly. The way things shift when someone has said something that could go several different directions and everyone present is suddenly paying close attention to which direction it goes. Dominic's face gave nothing away. "She sits where I put her." "Sure," Garrett smiled. "But I mean, what does she actually do, besides look pretty at the table?" The silence was immediate and complete. Ava set her fork down. She did it quietly without drama, with the deliberate calm of someone who has decided exactly what they're going to do next. "I do the math," she said. Garrett looked at her with the indulgent attention you give a child who has said something accidentally funny. "The math. Financial analysis. Transaction architecture. Pattern recognition and fund movements across multiple account structures." She looked at him with complete steadiness. "I identified the methodology your northern distribution partner used to divert funds from your Seattle operation in the third quarter of last year. The one you attributed to bookkeeping error. It wasn't a bookkeeping error." The air left the room. Garrett's smile stayed on his face for approximately 3 more seconds through sheer muscle memory. Then it disappeared. "What did you just say?" "Your Q3 loss. Approximately $230,000 attributed to vendor overpayment discrepancies. The vendor accounts were legitimate. The overpayment methodology was not. Someone inside your distribution chain ran a duplicate authorization sequence across 11 transactions. It's the same pattern I found here, which is how I recognized it." She kept her voice perfectly level. "I can show you the transaction strings if you'd like. I have the data." Dead silence. Then Vincent Mara from across the table said quietly, "How?" "I've been reviewing financial records from several connected operations as part of my work here. Your Seattle accounts were part of a broader pattern analysis. I wasn't specifically looking for your losses. I found them because they matched a signature I already knew." Mara looked at Dominic. Something passed between them that Ava could not fully read, but that felt significant. Heavy. The kind of look that means someone has just been proven right about something they've been saying for a while. Garrett had gone a particular color. It was not a good color. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that he searched for a word and settled on something with an edge in it. Girl found something in my accounts that my own people missed." "She's not my girl," Dominic said. His voice was completely even. The evenness itself was the warning. "She's the person at this table who just saved you from a second quarter of the same loss. I would choose the next word carefully." Garrett looked around the table. He found no allies, Not even his own associate, who had the expression of someone trying very hard to be invisible. "What's your point?" Garrett said, directing it at Ava now. "What do you want?" "I don't want anything from you." She looked at him simply. "I'm telling you the pattern exists in your operation because not telling you would have been irresponsible, and I don't do things irresponsibly. What you do with the information is your business." She picked up her fork and resumed eating. The table stayed quiet for a long moment. Then Vincent Mara let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Dominic," he said, "where exactly did you find her?" "She found herself," Dominic said. "I just provided the location." And there it was again. That thing she had seen once or twice before, that movement in his face, the one she was starting to be able to read. It was the closest thing he had to pride that he would allow himself in public. She looked down at her plate and did not let the warmth in her chest show on her face. That was hers. She was keeping it. The rest of the dinner passed differently. Garrett was quiet in the specific way of someone recalibrating. His associate asked Ava 2 genuine questions about the transaction pattern and listened to the answers with real attention. Mara talked to her across the table the way you talk to someone you've decided to take seriously, with the full weight of his attention, asking follow-up questions, testing the edges of what she knew, and finding that the edges were further out than he'd expected. When the table broke up and the men moved toward the other room, Mara stopped beside Ava and said low enough that only she could hear, "You've got a better mind than half the people I employ. If you ever find yourself in a different situation, I want you to know that my door is open." She looked at him. "I'll keep that in mind." He nodded. He moved on. She stood for a moment alone in the space between the dining room and the hallway and took a slow breath. She was steady. She was always steady in the moment. It was afterward that things caught up with her, when the adrenaline cleared and the reality of what had just happened settled in like cold water. She had just sat at a table with men who ran operations that moved millions of dollars and weapons and influence across 3 states, and she had not been afraid. She had been functional. She had used what she knew, and she had said what needed saying, and she had not apologized for either. She was almost to the stairs when Dominic's voice came from behind her. "Ava." She turned. He was standing in the doorway of the room the men had moved to, jackets still on, looking at her with that direct, contained attention. He crossed to her. He stopped when he was close enough to speak without being heard by anyone else. He looked at her for a moment before he said anything, in that way he had, like he was checking something internally before he committed to words. "What you did in there," he said. "Garrett deserved it." "Yes, he did. I'm not talking about Garrett." He paused. "I'm talking about what you chose to do with information that had nothing to do with you. You could have kept it, used it for leverage somewhere down the line." "I don't operate that way." "I know." He said it with a certainty that meant he had already understood this about her, that he was not surprised. "That's what I'm saying." She looked at him. "You're thanking me. I'm telling you that this house runs differently now than it did a month ago. That's because of you. And I want you to know that I know that." She absorbed this. She held it. She thought about a month ago, the car ride in the rain, the room with the lock. Petra's voice telling her she was not a prisoner, but she was not free. She thought about how much distance she had covered since then, not in miles, in something harder to measure. "Dominic," she said, "the man from Chicago, Mara. He offered me something just now." She watched his face very carefully when she said it. She saw the stillness that came over him, the particular quality of attention that meant he was processing something that mattered. "I know what he offered," Dominic said. "He's been looking for someone like you for 2 years. You knew he would approach me." "I suspected." "And you seated me across from him anyway." "Yes." She let that sit for a moment. "Why?" He looked at her steadily. "Because you deserve to know that what you do has value that extends beyond this house. Because you should understand what your options are. Because," he stopped. He started again. "Because I don't keep people here by keeping them ignorant. That's not how I do things." She stood in the hallway with that settling over her. She thought about Linda, who had kept her by keeping her in debt, kept her by making sure she never had enough information to see the whole picture, kept her small by controlling everything she knew and everything she touched. This was not that. This was something she did not have a clean word for yet. "I didn't take him up on it," she said. "I know. I'm not finished here." Something shifted in his expression, just slightly. "No," he said. "I didn't think you were." He went back to the room. She went upstairs. She was almost to her door when she heard the noise from below that stopped her cold. Not voices, something harder. A crash and then two rapid sounds that her mind identified before she fully processed them, and then shouting, and then the specific kind of chaos that has different texture from any other kind because it moves faster and people's voices go higher, and the air in a house changes immediately and completely. She was back down the stairs before she finished thinking about it. The room where Dominic's men had gathered. 3 of them were on their feet. Torres had his hand on something at his hip. Dominic was on the floor. For one single second, everything in Ava's body went cold and stopped. Then her training, 2 semesters of nursing school and 3 years of caring for a sick man at home, the kind of training that lives in your hands and your instincts rather than your memory kicked in completely. She crossed the room in 8 steps. She was on her knees beside him before any of the men moved. She could see the injury, his right side below the ribs, and she could see it was bad, but she could also see from his breathing that he was conscious and that his airway was clear, and that the damage was serious but not immediately unsurvivable if she moved quickly and correctly. "Who did this?" she said, not to Dominic, to the room. "We don't," Torres started. "Not now. Get me the medical kit from the 2nd floor office, the large 1 gray case top shelf." She had found it in her 2nd week, and she had noted its location with exactly this kind of possibility in mind. "Get it now and call whoever his doctor is. He needs to be here in the next 20 minutes. Nobody moved for one single paralyzed second. "Now," Ava said in a voice she didn't know. She had the voice of someone who was not asking. Torres moved. The room reorganized around her authority without any further argument. Dominic was looking at her. His face was tight with pain, but his eyes were completely focused, and she had learned enough about him by now to know that his eyes being focused meant he was still in the fight, still thinking, not fading. "You need to stay still," she said to him. "I mean it. Don't try to help me. You'll make it worse." "Is it bad?" he said. "It's manageable if you stop moving and let me work." She pressed her hands to the wound with the steady, controlled pressure that her nursing instructor had repeated until it was reflexive. "What happened?" "Someone came through the service entrance." His voice was controlled too through obvious effort. "It was fast." "Did you see them?" "One of them, young, nobody I recognized." She looked up at the men standing around them, which means whoever sent them used someone outside the organization, someone with access to the service entrance code. She looked at Felix, who had appeared in the doorway looking gray. "The code changes tonight, every entrance, and I need to know who has had access to this room in the last 72 hours. Felix stared at her. Then he nodded and was gone. The medical kit arrived. She worked. Her hands were steady in the way they had been when she was finishing the financial analysis, the way they went when the thing in front of her required everything she had, and she gave it without reservation. She was aware of the men around her. She was aware of the tension in the room and the sound of someone on the phone and the particular quality of silence from the man whose life was currently in her hands. She let all of it pass through her awareness without landing. There was only the work. Dominic's doctor arrived 18 minutes later. He stopped in the doorway when he saw Ava took in what she had done and said with professional brevity, "Good. Move to the left." She moved. She stayed in the room. Nobody asked her to leave. When the doctor finished his initial assessment, he looked up and said, "She may have saved him significant blood loss. Whoever taught her knew what they were doing." Torres looked at Ava. "Where did you learn that?" "My father was sick for 2 years, she said. "I learned what I needed to learn." She stood up. She was aware for the first time since she had come downstairs that her hands were shaking. Not in the moment, after the moment. Her body catching up to what had just happened. She pressed them flat against her thighs, the way she always did, and breathed through it. Dominic, from the surface where the doctor had him stabilized, said her name. She went to him. He looked at her with those dark, focused eyes, and she could see the pain in them, and she could see underneath it something else, something she did not look at for too long, because she wasn't ready to name it. "You didn't run," he said. "No. Most people would have." "I'm not most people." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know." She stood beside him while the doctor finished his work, and the room around them reorganized itself into the particular controlled chaos of an organization responding to a crisis. And she thought about the dinner and Garrett's dismissive smile in the moment she had set her fork down, and the way the room had shifted. She thought about Mara's quiet offer and Dominic's voice in the hallway telling her that she deserved to know her options. She thought about the service entrance and the unfamiliar face and the 8 months of diverted money, and Caruso's disappearance and the whole complicated, layered thing she had walked into a month ago, believing she would not survive. She was surviving. She was doing considerably more than surviving. Somewhere in this house, someone had just tried to remove Dominic Russo from the equation, which meant that whatever came next was going to be larger and faster and more dangerous than anything that had come before. And Ava Whitmore, who had been sold for $40,000 on a rainy night by people who believed she was worth nothing, was standing in the middle of it with steady hands and a mind that was already working through everything she knew, sorting it, filing it, looking for the pattern. She was going to find it. She was going to find it before whoever sent that young man through the service entrance had the chance to try again. She owed that much to herself, and she was done completely and permanently done being anything less than everything she was capable of being. The doctor stayed until 4 in the morning. Ava stayed until 5. She sat in the chair beside the bed where Dominic had been moved, not because anyone asked her to, not because she felt she owed him anything beyond what she had already given, but because her mind would not stop running. And she had learned years ago that when her mind would not stop, the best thing to do was give it something real to anchor to. Something in the room, something breathing. He slept, which the doctor said was the best possible outcome. She watched him sleep with the particular attention of someone who has spent time monitoring a sick person, checking the rhythm of it, the quality, whether it was rest or something more worrying. It was rest. His color was returning. His breathing was even. Around 3 in the morning, Petra appeared in the doorway with tea and a look on her face that said everything she was not going to say out loud. "You should sleep," Petra said. "I'll sleep when I've finished thinking." "What are you thinking about?" "The service entrance code. How many people had it? Whether the timing tonight was connected to the Caruso situation or separate. Whether Garrett from Seattle was angry enough about what happened at dinner to make a phone call." She wrapped her hands around the mug. "And whether the person who sent that young man through the door knew exactly where Dominic would be standing or whether they got lucky." Petra was quiet for a moment. "You think it was specific?" "The angle of the wound. His position in the room, yes. I think someone knew where he would be standing at that particular time, which means either the house has a secondary breach we haven't found, or someone at that dinner tonight communicated his position to someone outside." Petra sat down. She sat the way people sit when the weight of something has just become undeniable. "You've been running this since it happened." "I've been running it since I came back downstairs and found him on the floor." Ava looked at the man in the bed. "He's going to want information when he wakes up. I'd rather have something useful to give him." "And do you?" "I have a theory. I need 3 things to confirm it." She looked at Petra. "I need the complete access log for the service entrance for the past 30 days. I need the phone records for everyone who was in this house tonight, guests included, for the 2 hours surrounding the dinner. And I need to know if Caruso had any contact with Garrett's operation before he was removed." The silence that followed was a particular kind, the kind that means someone is recalibrating who they are dealing with. "I'll make some calls," Petra said quietly. She left. Ava turned back to the man in the bed and said nothing for a long time. At 5 in the morning, she went to her room. At 7, she was back downstairs. At 7:15, Dominic was awake. She heard him before she saw him, his voice from behind the closed door, low and controlled, and with that particular edge that meant he was in pain and managing it rather than acknowledging it. She knocked. A pause. Then, "Come in." He was sitting up. He looked like a man who had decided that lying down was a form of surrender he was not interested in. His color was better than it had been at midnight. His eyes were fully focused and already moving across the room in that assessing way, taking inventory of what had changed while he was unconscious. They landed on her. "You stayed," he said. "I had thinking to do." "Did you finish it?" "Most of it." She crossed to the chair beside the bed and sat in it without asking. "How's the pain?" "Manageable." "That means bad." Something crossed his face that was almost wry. "It means manageable, Ava." "All right." She looked at him directly. "I need to tell you what I think happened last night, and I need you to listen without interrupting because some of it you're not going to like." He looked at her for a moment, Then he settled back against the headboard with the careful movement of a man protecting his right side and said, "Go ahead." The attack was not opportunistic. Someone knew your position in that room during that specific window of time. That means either there's a surveillance breach somewhere in the house, or someone present at or connected to last night's dinner communicated your location in real time. She paused. Garrett's associate, the one who didn't speak much, he stepped out twice during the dinner. I noticed it. I didn't think enough of it at the time. I should have. Dominic's jaw tightened. Connolly. Is that his name? He's been with Garrett for 3 years, former military, communications background. He said it the way you say something when pieces are assembling in front of you into a shape you recognize. He would know how to make a clean communication in a short window. And Garrett was angry. After what happened at dinner, he was angry enough to act fast and stupid. She kept her voice level. Angry men with resources are dangerous because they don't plan as carefully as they should. If Garrett ordered this, then there's a conversation coming that I can't be present for. I understand that. She held his gaze. But before that conversation happens, I need you to consider something. If Garrett acted this quickly and this badly, it means he's frightened. Not just angry, frightened, which means whatever I found in his accounts, whatever pattern I identified at that dinner, it's bigger than he let on. His reaction was disproportionate to embarrassment. It was proportionate to exposure. The room went very still. Dominic looked at her with the full weight of his attention and said, "You think he's running something?" I think the fun diversions I found in his Q3 accounts weren't losses. I think they were transfers to someone, and I think he cannot afford to have someone like me looking at his books with any kind of access. She paused. I think whoever he's paying or whoever is paying him wanted this problem resolved before I found more. Dominic was quiet for 30 seconds. It was a very long 30 seconds. Then he said, "I need those account records. I already pulled everything I had access to last night while you were unconscious. It's on the laptop in your office." She stood. I flagged the sections most likely to contain the transfer endpoints. You'll see it when you look at it. The pattern is the same as Caruso's methodology, which is not a coincidence. It's the same architecture, meaning Caruso and Garrett were connected. Dominic's expression shifted into something that was very controlled and very cold. Caruso introduced Garrett to this organization. Yes, I found that in the meeting records you gave me access to 4 years ago, Caruso vouched for Garrett's Seattle operation specifically. She kept her voice steady. Dominic, Caruso didn't just steal from you. He built you a network of people who steal from you, and Garrett was part of that network. The silence that followed was unlike any of the previous silences. This one had mass. It had the specific gravity of a man understanding that the betrayal he thought he had contained was not contained at all, that it had roots he had not yet found, that the thing he cut off had been growing underground for longer than he knew. He looked at the ceiling. He breathed. She watched him absorb it, watched the control hold, watched him refuse to break even with that weight on him, and she understood something in that moment that she had been circling without landing on this man's strength was not performance. It was not ego. It was the genuine practice, costly discipline of someone who had learned very early that losing control of yourself was more dangerous than anything anyone else could do to you. She respected it more than she expected to. Torres, he said, I'll get him. And Felix, and whoever is currently at the gate. He looked at her. And you stay. I want you in the room. She absorbed that. I want you in the room, not permitted to stay. Wanted. She felt the distinction. All right, she said. The next 2 hours were the most concentrated she had experienced in the estate. Torres came, and Dominic spoke to him with the specific economical authority of a man who had assessed a situation completely and was now deploying responses with surgical precision. New security protocols, new entrance codes, a full review of every person who had been on the property in the past 30 days. A very quiet set of instructions regarding Garrett's current location, which Torres received without expression and left to execute. Felix came and received a separate set of instructions regarding the household finances, a full freeze on all outward transfers until Ava had conducted a complete review of the past 6 months. Felix looked at Ava when Dominic said this. She looked back at him steadily. Then they were alone again. Dominic looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the wound. He looked like a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just discovered it was heavier than he thought. 9 years, he said, not to her particularly, to the room. Yes. Caruso sat across that desk from me for 9 years. He was at my father's funeral. He helped me build every system this organization runs on. He paused. And the whole time he was dismantling it from the inside. Not the whole time, Alpha said. People who betray you rarely start that way. Something changes. Money, fear, a better offer from someone else. It doesn't excuse it, but it's rarely as simple as someone being bad from the beginning. He looked at her. Does that make it better? No, it makes it human, which is worse in some ways, because it means you can't just write off your own judgment. You weren't wrong about him for 9 years. You were right for most of them, and then something shifted, and you didn't see it in time. She paused. That's not failure. That's just the cost of trusting people. The room was very quiet. He looked at her with something that was not quite the calculating attention she had become accustomed to. Something underneath it. Something that didn't have the protective layer over it that everything else did. Is that something you believe, he said, or something you are telling me because it's useful? Both, she said honestly, but mostly the first one. He was quiet for a moment. What shifted the thing between you and that woman who sold you? Your stepmother. Was she always what she is? The question surprised her. She did not show it. She thought about it with the same honesty she gave everything. No, I think when my father was alive, she was careful. He was a gentle man, but he was not a weak one. He would have seen it. After he died, what she'd been keeping controlled just stopped being controlled. She didn't become cruel, she just stopped hiding it. And your sister, stepsister. Brielle learned it. Some things you inherit, some things you absorb from the person who raises you. She paused. I absorbed different things. I chose to. He nodded slowly. You chose. Every day, even when it was very hard. She looked at him, especially when it was very hard. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I need to tell you something about the original arrangement with your stepmother. She went still. The debt was real, he said. Your father did sign loans in both names, but the amount Linda presented to me was inflated. The actual debt was $11,000, not 40. The number hit her like cold water. What? She added to it, added her own gambling losses, some household expenses, and her daughter's credit card debt, and presented the total as a single obligation under your father's original signature. He kept his eyes on her. I knew when I saw the paperwork that the numbers had been altered. I'm not careless with documents. She stared at him. You knew. Yes. And you still came. Yes. The words sat in the room. She worked through the implications with a mind that was very good at implications. He had known the debt was manufactured. He had known Linda was lying. And he had come anyway, and he had taken her anyway, and she had spent the first week of her time here believing she was property. Why by spy? She said. Her voice was very controlled. Because I looked at your name on that paperwork, and I pulled the background that I pull on anyone connected to a transaction. And what I found was a woman with 2 years of nursing school, 4 years of small business accounting, and a pattern of employment that showed she had been supporting a household of 3 on whatever income she could piece together since her father got sick. He paused. I found someone who had been carrying people who did not deserve to be carried for years. Someone who was about to be devoured by those same people if nothing changed. She couldn't speak for a moment. She made herself breathe. You took me out of that house, she said. That's what you did. I gave you a different situation. What you did with it was yours. You could have just told Linda that the debt was fraudulent. You could have walked away. Yes. Why didn't you? He looked at her steadily. Because I have spent a significant part of my adult life recognizing useful things and making sure they end up somewhere they can function. And because, he stopped, because the look on your face when you came into that living room, the way you assessed the room, the way you held yourself when she said what she said. He paused again. I have been around a great many people in a great many situations. I know what broken looks like, and I know what resilience looks like when it's trying to survive being broken. You were the second thing, and I did not think it was right for the second thing to disappear. Ava sat with that for a long time. She was aware of her own breathing. She was aware of the precise, careful way he had said it, without sentiment, without performance, with the stripped-down honesty of a man who does not use words carelessly and therefore means them fully when he uses them. She did not cry. She was done with that. But something in her chest moved that she had kept very still for a very long time, and moving was not the same as breaking. Moving meant it was still alive. "You should have told me," she said finally. "Yes, I should have. I'm telling you now." "Why now?" "Because you just saved my life, and you identified a network of betrayal inside my organization that I would have spent another year finding. And because you sat in that chair until 5 a.m. without being asked and spent the night thinking about how to help me." He paused. "Because you've earned the truth. You've earned it several times over." She nodded slowly. She absorbed it. She filed it. "All right," she said. "Then here's the truth I owe you in return. I am not staying here because of the debt. I haven't been staying because of the debt for at least 2 weeks. I'm staying because this is the first place in 3 years where I have been allowed to be completely what I am, where it was useful instead of threatening, where I wasn't asked to be smaller or quieter or less." She looked at him directly. "I want you to know that. So there's no confusion about what I'm doing here or why." The room held that between them for a long moment. Then Dominic said, "The debt is cleared." She blinked. "What?" "As of now, the debt is cleared. Whatever you choose to do from this point, it is not under obligation. If you want to leave, Torres will drive you wherever you want to go. If you want to contact Mara about his offer, I will not stand in your way." He held her gaze. "If you want to stay, you stay as something other than a transaction." She looked at him. She thought about everything, all of it, the rainy night and the car ride, and the room with the lock and the breakfast table, and the library and the financial records, and the dinner, and his face on the floor last night, and her hands pressing down, and the doctor's voice saying she may have saved him significant blood loss. She thought about the answer she had already known for at least 2 weeks, the one she had been keeping back, until she was certain, until she could say it without it being about fear or gratitude or the particular trap of having nowhere else to go. She was certain now. "I'm staying," she said. He nodded once, with the particular gravity he gave things that mattered. "Then I need you to look at something." He reached for the folder on the bedside table and handed it to her. "Petra pulled the access logs last night. There's a name on there that appears 4 times in the 48 hours before the attack. Someone who was logged into the secondary security system, not the main one. The secondary one has a different administrator." She took the folder. She opened it. She found the name. She recognized it immediately. It was Danny, the young man who sometimes looked at her with the expression of someone trying to decide what kind of person they were going to be. He had decided. She closed the folder. She looked at Dominic. She thought about 26 years old, in a face that still had some becoming left in it, in the particular sadness of watching someone choose wrong when they still had time to choose differently. "He's still in the house," she said. "Yes." "He doesn't know we know." "No." She thought about it. She thought about what Caruso's network meant, how many endpoints it had, how much information had already moved through it. She thought about what you do with a man who is young enough to still be frightened. And frightened people will tell you things that resolved people won't. "Don't remove him yet," she said. "Not until I've looked at everything he had access to. He's a thread. If you pull him too fast, you lose the rest of the rope." She paused. "And if he's scared enough, he might be useful." Dominic looked at her with that expression she had started to recognize, the one that was not quite pride, because pride was too simple a word for it. The one that meant he had updated his estimate again and found it still wasn't high enough. "All right," he said. "He's yours." She stood. She took the folder. She thought about a girl sold for $40,000 and how much distance stood between that girl and this moment, and how every inch of that distance had been paid for with something she had chosen to give, rather than something that had been taken from her. That was the difference. She understood that now with a clarity that had no sentimentality in it, only fact. She had been thrown away. And what happened to things that got thrown away, if they were strong enough, if they held their shape through everything that tried to reshape them, was that they sometimes ended up exactly where they were supposed to be. She walked out of the room with the folder under her arm, and her mind already running through everything she needed to do and the house around her. The house that had seemed like a fortress, and then a prison, and then something she didn't have a word for yet settled into her footsteps like it had always known she was coming. Danny broke in 40 minutes. Ava had not expected it to take longer. She had sat across from him in the small room off the kitchen, where Felix sometimes did inventory, just the two of them. No Torres, no Dominic, nobody with a weapon or a reputation to make the air heavy. Just her. Just the folder on the table between them, with his name on the access log, and her hands folded on top of it, and her eyes on his face steady and completely without anger. Anger would have made it easier for him. Anger gives frightened people something to push against. She gave him nothing to push against. She just waited. He lasted about 12 minutes before he started talking. Then he could not stop. He was 26, and he had been recruited by Caruso 8 months ago, not with threats, but with money and a story that made Caruso sound like the wrong party, a loyal man being edged out by a boss who was consolidating power and eliminating anyone who knew too much. Danny had believed it because he wanted to believe it, because Caruso had been kind to him in the specific way that people who need something from you are kind. And because 26 and underpaid and wanting more is a combination that bad people have been exploiting since the beginning of time. His job had been simple: monitor the secondary security system, note Dominic's position in the house during specific windows, and send a coded message to a number he had memorized and never saved. He had done it 3 times before last night. Nothing had happened on the previous 3 occasions. He had started to believe nothing would happen. He had told himself he was just passing information, not participating in anything else, which is the thing people tell themselves when they cannot afford to look at what they are actually doing. Last night, something had happened, and Danny had sat with that since midnight, and he was not built for it. His face said so. His hand said so. "The number you sent the messages to," Ava said. "Do you know whose it is?" "No, I swear I don't. Caruso gave it to me before he stopped. "Before he was removed," she said. "Yes, and after Caruso was gone, did someone else contact you?" "Once, different number. They said the job wasn't finished and I needed to stay in place." "What did you say?" He looked at his hands. "I said okay." She absorbed that. She thought about fear and how it makes people say okay to things they know are wrong because the alternative feels unsurvivable. She had said okay to things herself in a different life for similar reasons. She did not tell him that, but she held it somewhere in the part of her that made decision. "The second number," she said. "Did you keep it?" He looked up. He reached into his pocket. He put his phone on the table. "I didn't delete anything," he said. "I didn't know what to do with it. I thought maybe if I kept it, I could. I don't know what I thought." She picked up the phone. She looked at the number. She photographed it with her own phone and then put his back on the table and stood up and said, "Stay in this room. Don't use your phone. Don't speak to anyone." "What's going to happen to me?" She looked at him. She thought about what she wanted to say, which was complicated, and what was useful to say, which was simpler. "That depends on what the information you've given me is worth and what Dominic decides to do with it. What happens to you is not in my hands." She paused at the door. "But you told me the truth when you could have lied. That's worth something. I'll make sure it's noted." She went directly to Dominic's room. He was out of bed. He was standing at the window with his hand at his side in a way that meant the wound was talking to him, but he was refusing to listen. Dressed phone in hand, looking like a man who had decided that recovery was an inconvenience he would attend to later. "Sit down," she said, walking in. "I'm fine. You had a serious wound 12 hours ago, and you are standing at a window being stubborn. Sit down and I'll tell you what I found." He looked at her with an expression that was somewhere between exasperated and amused and sat down. She told him. All of it. The 40 minutes, the second number, the phone, the pattern of 3 prior check-ins that had not resulted in action, the contact after Caruso's removal that meant someone above Caruso was still running the network. Dominic listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said the number. She showed him her phone. He looked at it. He was still for 3 seconds, which on him was the equivalent of a visible reaction. "I know this number," he said. "Who is it?" He looked up from the phone. "Reyes, Eduardo Reyes. He runs a syndicate out of San Diego. He and Caruso go back 15 years. He paused. "He's been trying to expand north for 3 years. I blocked 2 of his moves directly. He needs me removed to access the Los Angeles corridor. So Caruso wasn't just stealing from you. He was building a path for Reyes to walk through. Yes. And Garrett was part of the path. His Seattle operation would have given Reyes a northern anchor once the Los Angeles corridor opened. She thought through it quickly, the whole architecture of it, assembling in her mind the way financial structures assembled, layer by layer, each piece revealing the function of the next. Reyes has been patient. This has been building for at least 2 years, probably more. He'll move fast now, Dominic said. He knows the attack failed. He knows I'm still standing. He'll calculate that his window is closing, and he'll either cut his losses or accelerate. He'll accelerate, Ava said, because cutting his losses means admitting the investment in Caruso and Garrett was wasted. Men like Reyes don't absorb that kind of loss quietly. They double down. She paused. Which means we have maybe 48 hours before he tries something larger. Dominic looked at her. We. She met his eyes. We. Something settled in his expression. Something that had been slightly unresolved until this moment and was now resolved. He nodded once. Then we have work to do. The next 36 hours moved faster than anything Ava had experienced in the estate. Dominic worked the phone with the focused efficiency of a man who had built relationships across 2 decades precisely for moments like this, calling in debts, gathering information, repositioning resources, with the kind of quiet authority that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. Torres coordinated security. Felix handled the household and kept everything running with the particular competence of someone who understood that stability in the small things supported stability in the large ones. And Ava worked the money, because if Reyes was going to move, he needed funding. And funding moved through accounts. And accounts left patterns. And patterns were what she was built for. She sat at the desk in the office Dominic had given her full access to. Now, not the side room, the main office, his office, with 12 months of transaction records from every connected operation and the phone number Danny had kept, and the account architecture she had already mapped from the Caruso investigation. She worked backward from what she knew. She built the model of what Reyes's operation should look like if her theory was correct. And then she went looking for the places where the real numbers matched the model. She found the first match at 2 in the morning. A holding account in Nevada, different shell company from the one Caruso had used, but the same incorporation agent, the same registered address format, the same pattern of small regular deposits, building toward a large single transfer. The large single transfer was scheduled, 48 hours out. She stared at that number for a long time. She ran the calculation 3 times to be certain. Then she picked up her phone and called Dominic. He answered on the second ring. I found it, she said. The funding transfer for whatever he's planning. It's scheduled to clear in 47 hours. If we redirect it before it clears, we don't just stop the immediate action. We take the operational budget he's been building for 2 years. A pause. How much? She told him. The silence on the other end of the phone was very specific. It was the silence of a man who has just understood the full scale of what was being planned against him and is simultaneously understanding that the person who found it is sitting in his office at 2 in the morning doing mathematics that could save everything he has built. Can you redirect it cleanly? He said. I need 2 things. Authorization codes for the intermediate account and someone on the other end who can receive and hold the funds through a legitimate vehicle before Reyes's people notice the transfer failed. She paused. Do you have someone you trust completely for that? Mara, he said immediately. Call him. He'll want to know why. Tell him the truth. He already knows most of it. And he offered me a job 3 days ago, which means he's already decided we're worth investing in. She paused. He'll do it. Another silence. All right. Then Ava. Yes. Get some sleep after this. At least 2 hours. You're not useful to me, exhausted. She almost laughed. It came out as something quieter. Something that was in the neighborhood of warmth without being quite that. I'll sleep when it's done. That's what I expected you to say. He hung up. She went back to work. Mara agreed in under 10 minutes. Dominic called back to tell her. She had already anticipated the agreement and was 3 steps ahead of it, building the redirect structure, timing it to the quarter hour before the original transfer was scheduled to clear, giving Reyes people the minimum possible window to detect and respond. At 6:15 in the morning, 41 minutes before the scheduled transfer, she executed the redirect. She sat very still for the 3 minutes it took for the confirmation to come back. She was aware of her own heartbeat. She was aware of the early morning silence of the house and the sound of the ocean through the window and the weight of what was moving through servers and accounts and intermediary structures at this exact moment. 2 years of Reyes's careful construction coming apart because a woman who had been sold for $40,000 understood how money moved and had been paying attention. The confirmation came. She exhaled. She pressed her hands flat on the desk. She sat like that for a moment, just breathing, just letting the reality of it land. Then she picked up her phone and sent Dominic one word. Done. His response came back in under 30 seconds. Come downstairs. She found him in the kitchen, standing which she noted with the particular attention she gave his physical state since the attack. Standing but steady. He had coffee. He had made 2 cups, which she noted also. She sat down. She took the cup he pushed toward her. They sat in the same early morning kitchen, quiet they had established in the first week, the comfortable kind, the kind that didn't require filling. Then Dominic said, Reyes called me 20 minutes ago. She looked up. What? When the transfer failed to clear, he knew immediately. He called to negotiate. He paused. He was considerably less composed than I have ever heard him. What did he say? He said he wanted to discuss terms. I told him there were no terms. I told him his network inside my organization had been fully identified and removed. I told him his operational funding was no longer his operational funding. And I told him that if he came near Los Angeles again, I would send him the full documentation of everything his people had done in my territory and let him explain it to the 3 other organizations he has arrangements with. He looked at her steadily. He has a great deal to lose if those organizations learn how he operates. He'll back down. He already has. He's recalculating what it costs to continue versus what it costs to cut his losses. This time the math works in my favor. He paused. Because someone made sure the math worked in my favor. She wrapped both hands around her coffee. She was tired in a way that went all the way down, the productive kind of tired that comes after something real. After you have put everything you have into something that mattered and it held. Danny, she said, what are you going to do with him? Remove him from security, reassign him to something with no access to sensitive systems. He's young, he was manipulated by someone who was very good at it. He paused. You said his honesty was worth noting. I noted it. She looked at him. That's generous. It's practical. People who make one bad choice and then tell the truth about it are recoverable. People who make one bad choice and compound it with more lies are not. He looked at her. I learned that from watching someone recently. She understood he meant her. She understood he meant the choice she had made every single day since she arrived, the choice to be exactly what she was. No performance, no deception, no making herself smaller to fit someone else's expectation of what she should be. She did not say anything. She didn't need to. It was 3 days later that Linda called. Ava was in the office when her phone rang with a number she hadn't looked at in 6 weeks. She stared at it for a full 5 seconds. Then she answered. Ava. Linda's voice, the carefully modulated version, the one she used when she needed something. Softer at the edges, almost convincing if you hadn't spent 3 years learning its topography. I've been trying to reach you. I know, Ava said. I saw the missed calls. A pause. I was worried about you. No, you weren't. Another pause, longer. Things have been difficult here since you left. There have been some financial complications. Linda. Brielle has had some trouble with Linda. She said it cleanly. I know what this call is. You're in debt again, or Brielle is, and you've calculated that I have access to resources now that I didn't have before, and you think that the right combination of softness and suggestion of guilt will get you what you want. She paused. It won't. The softness in Linda's voice shifted, just slightly, the thing underneath it always there showing through. After everything I did for you, after I kept you in that house when you could have what? Put me out. You needed me, I cooked and cleaned and paid bills and absorbed everything you chose to direct at me for 3 years. And when you ran out of ways to use me, you sold me to a stranger to cover a debt you created. Her voice was completely level, not cold exactly, resolved. I don't owe you anything, Linda. I don't owe Brielle anything. I am not going to send you money. I am not going to intercede in your financial situation. I am not going to do anything for you except tell you clearly, and once that this is the last time I will answer this number. You ungrateful. Goodbye, Linda. She ended the call. She set the phone on the desk. She sat very still for a moment, waiting for the familiar weight of it. The guilt that Linda had spent 3 years installing in her like a program, the reflexive contraction of the self that happened whenever she stood firm against someone who had trained her to fold. It didn't come. She waited a little longer to be sure. Still nothing. Just the quiet of the office and the sound of the house around her and her own breathing and the clean, uncomplicated feeling of a door closed by her own hand. She picked up her phone and blocked the number. Then she went back to work. Petra found her an hour later and stood in the doorway with a look that said she already knew about the call, because Petra always knew and said nothing except, "Dominic wants you when you have a moment." I have a moment now. She found him in the library, her favorite room it turned out, and his. They had both claimed it separately and arrived at sharing it without discussion, which seemed to her emblematic of how most of the significant things between them had developed without announcement, without negotiation, simply by both of them being who they were in the same space until the shape of it became clear. He was standing when she came in. He looked better than he had since the night of the attack. The controlled tension he always carried redistributed back into something that was more his natural state, purposeful, contained, quietly authoritative. He had something in his hand, a document. He held it out to her. She took it. She read it. She read it again. It was a transfer document. From the redirected Reyes funds which Mara had held, and which were now fully cleared and documented, a significant portion had been moved into a holding structure. The holding structure had one named beneficiary, her name. She looked up. What is this? Your percentage of the recovery. Standard practice when someone inside my organization generates a significant financial outcome. He paused. You are inside my organization. This is your percentage. Dominic, this is, she looked at the number again. It was not $40,000. It was not close to $40,000. It was a number that meant something she did not have words for yet, independence options, the ability to choose her own next thing from a position of having rather than lacking. This is too much. It's the correct percentage. I don't adjust percentages based on sentiment. I don't know what to do with this. Yes, you do. He looked at her steadily. You know exactly what to do with it. You've been managing money since you were 16. You'll do something careful and intelligent with it, and it will be worth more in 5 years than it is now. A pause. What you do with it is yours, the same way everything you've built here is yours. She stood holding the document and thought about 6 weeks ago, the rainy night, the living room, her name signed on a debt she hadn't created being handed to a stranger who did not look at her face. She thought about the bag she had packed in 11 minutes, the lock on the door, the first morning she had slept without waking afraid. She thought about Caruso and Danny and Garrett and Reyes and the 47 hours that had dismantled 2 years of someone else's patient construction. She thought about Linda's voice on the phone in the absence of guilt, where guilt used to live automatically. She thought about who she had been and who she was now, and how the distance between those two people was not something that had been given to her. Nobody had handed her this. Dominic had provided location, as he had once said himself. Everything else had been hers. Her mind, her skills, her choices, her refusal to be reduced. Her insistence on being exactly and completely what she was, even when the easiest thing would have been to make herself smaller. She folded the document. She held it. She looked at Dominic Russo, who had looked at a woman everyone else had thrown away and seen something worth keeping. Not because he was a good man in the simple sense of that word, but because he was a precise one, in his precision had recognized something real. I want to renegotiate the terms of my position here, she said. Something moved in his expression. Do you? I'm not here under obligation anymore. You cleared that. I'm not here out of gratitude because I was raised to understand that gratitude is not a sustainable basis for anything. I'm here because this is where I function best, and because the work matters, and because... She paused, and this was the part she had been working toward. The part she had been sure enough of for at least 2 weeks, but had waited to say until she was standing on ground that was fully hers, because you are the first person since my father who looked at what I actually am and decided it was worth something. Not in spite of it, because of it. He was very still. I'm not asking for anything, she said. I'm telling you where I stand, so there's no confusion. So it's said out loud and real, rather than existing only in the space between things. She held his gaze. I thought you deserved to know that, the same way you told me I deserved to know my options. Dominic Russo, who had built an empire on knowing when to speak and when to let silence do the work, was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed the room. He stopped when he was close enough that she could see the particular quality of his attention when it was fully directed, which was considerable, which had never been fully directed at her like this without something functional attached to it. He said, I told Mara last week that you were not available for his offer. She blinked. You told him that before you cleared the debt. Yes. You were certain I would stay. No. He paused. I was certain I didn't want you to go. Those are different things. I have learned recently to be more careful about the difference. Something moved across his face, genuine and unguarded, in a way she had never seen from him in any room with anyone else. I am not a simple man to be near Ava. I don't have a simple life. What I can offer is, I know what you can offer, she said. I've been paying attention for 6 weeks. I know exactly what this life is and what it isn't and what being beside you means. She looked at him without flinching. I'm not afraid of complicated. I was raised in it. I just need it to be honest. It will be honest, he said, that I can promise without qualification. Then we have a deal. He looked at her, and Dominic Russo, who almost never smiled, who had been carefully controlled in every room she had seen him in, who had built his entire life around the management of his own expression, smiled. It was not large. It did not need to be. It was real, and it reached his eyes, and it was entirely and exclusively for her. She held it, filed it, let it land somewhere it would stay. 6 months later, Ava stood at the head of a table of 12 men who ran various components of Dominic's expanded operation, a seat that had been created for her and that she had walked into without ceremony and without apology. The agenda in front of her was hers. The analysis she presented was hers. The silence in the room when she spoke was the silence of people who had learned, some of them the hard way, that her words carried the same weight as Dominic's, because Dominic had said so publicly and she had earned it privately, and those two things together were not an arrangement anyone in that room was interested in challenging. She thought sometimes about Linda's voice on the phone and how it had not touched her. She thought about Brielle's smile in the hallway on the night she left Have Fun, and how that smile looked very different from this end of the distance between then and now. She thought about her father, who had taught her to read a ledger and hold her ground and find the center of herself that nobody could reach without her permission. She thought about how he had loved her without condition, and how she had carried that love through everything that came after him, kept it intact through 3 years of someone trying to convince her she was worthless, brought it with her in the bag. She packed in 11 minutes on a rainy night. He would have understood this, she thought. He would not have predicted it, but he would have understood it. He would have seen the things she had built from the materials she had, from what she knew and who she was, and the choice she made every single day to be fully and unapologetically herself. He would have recognized it as the thing he had always known was in her. Dominic's hand found hers under the table. Briefly, without announcement. Just a point of contact, just the weight of another person's certainty meeting her own. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the agenda, on the work, on the room full of people who answered to her now. She squeezed back. The girl who had been sold for $40,000 to settle a debt she had never agreed to, who had arrived at a stranger's house in the rain, with a bag packed in 11 minutes and nothing but her own mind and her father's watch, and the stubborn, unbreakable insistence on being exactly what she was. That girl had not survived in spite of what had been done to her. She had survived because of what had always been in her, waiting for the room to finally be big enough. She had been thrown away by people who thought they knew her value. She had landed somewhere that recognized it. And she had built something from that landing that no one, not Linda, not Brielle, not Caruso, not Reyes, not any of the people who had looked at her and seen something disposable could ever take back. She was Ava Whitmore. She was the woman at the head of this table. She was the mind behind the empire and the hand that had steadied it when it bled, and the voice that said clearly what needed to be said without apology or performance. And she was at last completely and irrevocably free.